My name is Russell Scruggs. I was born in Missoula in 1946 and graduated from Stevensville High School and lived in the Bitterroot Valley. And this instance will go back to when I was actually in grade school, and then between my grade school and my first year in high school when we moved and lived south of Hamilton, Montana and stuff. So, and when I was younger, they started rip-rapping some of the sloughs and rivers with old cars, and my brother and I went down in the river bottom and found that the water level was low enough that we decided we really ought to have some speedometers and some other things and clocks and things out of some of the old car bodies. So since I was younger, I got designated to go all the way back to the house and get some pliers and some crescent wrenches and some screwdrivers so we could try to get some of these out of the old cars. So as I crawled out through the brush up across the field, we were maybe half a mile at the most from where we were at to where I lived. And when I broke out of the brush, headed towards the house, this would have probably been when I was about in the 7th grade. That's why I gave you when I was born, to give you could figure some ages there. And I looked up as I started to run towards the house, and there was this large, like the blimps we see at football games where they view what's going on, only it wasn't. And along the edges were kind of portals-like thing. It almost looked like people sitting in there looking out at the distance from me. They were relatively close, and I could make this out. And out of the bottom were these disc-shaped saucers that would be just about big enough for maybe one and sometimes two people to be sitting in there, like a little airplane type thing to ride around in. So they were probably maybe 15-20 feet in diameter would be my best guess. And you'd see one zip out and go over and disappear, and then maybe another would come back, come straight up in the bottom and go into this craft. And I was pretty excited to see this. In those days you could hear a little bit of people talking about UFOs and their concern. And as I came out across the field there, I saw that, and I looked around, and we didn't have too close of neighbors. But I looked around, and the one neighbor that was past where we lived was at a corral, and he and a son or someone were trying to load some sheep in the back of a pickup. So I changed my course and ran the best I could at my age, because I wanted to point it out to somebody so that somebody else would know what I'd seen. And I was running over there. It probably took me 3-4 minutes to get there, and I was breathing pretty hard. And I looked at them. They says, "What's wrong?" And I says, "Did you see what I saw?" And I turned to point up, and they looked up, and I looked up, and this thing was completely gone. So they looked at me and kind of laughed, And I went back to the house and got the tools and went back down in the river, brought them, told my brother, and he says, "Yeah, right," He didn't see it either. And when I came home and stuff, then I mentioned it to my mom, and she was kind of quiet, but was kind of interested. And I think she took me more serious than anybody else in the family. We did later go to the movie that was about the UFOs and stuff. And so what happened, we were down at that ranch there, and at the 8th grade when I graduated from Grandstale and whatnot, my dad had the chance. He was working at a meat market there for Sizer's Economy Foods at Hamilton, and he had the chance to lease Frazier's Slaughterhouse down by Stevensville, Montana. And we had moved up from there, so we moved back down there and rented a house right next door to where my dad's slaughterhouse was. And I wasn't old enough to drive, but my brother was. He's a year older than me, and he was driving. So what we would do, since we had the small place where we were 4 miles south of Hamilton, that was 10 or so acres, and it had hand sprinkler line systems on it, then my brother and I would have an early evening meal. And then we would drive down, change the sprinklers, stay overnight in the empty house while it was trying to be sold. And then in the morning we'd change the hand line again, and we would come back home and have breakfast and then work around the slaughterhouse. So that became our daily task there. And it was probably late June. It was late in the evening. And since we lived on the Stevensville side, that's the east side highway down the valley. When you go from Missoula through to Hamilton, we would take that old highway down through there and back. And at that time, I do definitely remember we were driving a 58 Studebaker Scotsman 4-door sedan, and my brother was driving it. And when we went down the east side, and you go through the east side there, pretty close to Carvalis is what we call a S-curve in the highway. Anybody that knows that area will probably be able to find this on the map, or if you're of interest. And you go into the curve headed south, and it goes towards the west, and then it turns and head south again, and just as we came through that curve headed south again, it was getting dark. It was probably 10-ish at night in June, so it was getting dark, and we looked over, and here was this large disc saucer. And I would have to say that by using the telephone poles to scale and the distance between the telephone poles, that we're probably looking at something in this situation of 135 feet in diameter. It was large. It was no more than 2 telephone poles high for a scale. It was no more than 5 or 6 telephone heights from us off the highway, so we were very close to this craft, okay? And we pulled over at the edge of the curve there, and my brother shut the car lights off. I rolled my window down, and I says, "Do you see what I see?" And we kind of, yeah, you know. And I rolled the window down to see if we could hear a sound, because we knew in those days the only thing that hovers are helicopters. They're pretty noisy. And I started timing it. I had a wristwatch on, and I was kind of curious, and we were watching it there, and it was over a homestead there, kind of house, and a large corral over cattle, kind of they had almost like a spotlight going on. The light was coming down underneath this on the cattle. The cattle were really noisy. All the lights in the homes and everything around were out. The electromagnetic field had shut all the lights out in the area. And my brother got out of the car and walked around to the front, and then he got to thinking maybe that wasn't the smartest thing to do, get out of the car. And he came back in, got in the car, and he says, "I'm kind of concerned, maybe we should leave." And he turned his headlights on, and this thing went up vertical real fast, just a dot. And I said, "Shut your lights off again," and he did, and it came back down and started doing what it was doing again. And during this period of time, when I rolled the window down, the only sound I could hear was like a single old Maytag washing machine motor, put, 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 put. Now I don't know whether that had to do with the corral or what was around there, or from it, because the sound was coming from the same direction. But where there was no loud noises, we kept keeping track of my time on my watch, and the total time we watched, it was pretty close, between 5 or 7 minutes of hovering. And then he got really upset, and he says, "We've got to get out of here." And when he started the car and took off, this thing went up vertically, very rapid, until it was just a small dot and disappeared within 3 seconds, clear across in the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness area off the side in there. And so this was a very interesting situation. We were close enough to see the lights on it that were like fluorescent lights that would go around a large dome. This would be, if you would describe this disc, it would be like you putting an egg in grease. And when you put it in, the white of the egg, if you could keep it a perfect circle when you're looking down on it, and the yolk part would be the dome area. And the dome area all the way around it was divided into like huge picture windows all the way around the 360 degrees. And they were probably 7 to 9 feet tall, kind of glassed-like. There was a white light all the way around just at the top base of the disc part. And then also a white light just down to maybe 3 or 4 feet on the dome part. Corresponded with it parallel, and so there was a continual white fluorescent light like that. And all the years I've been around light, the closest light I can think of is the new lights that we have now that are cold lights. It was so similar to that. And then this was divided off in partitions, and around that zigzag between the window partitions you have the opposite colors that were on the same colors as the airplanes at the time, on the opposite sides. They would travel 180 degrees apart around that craft all the time. That's how close we were. And you could see, looked like tall humanoid type figures behind that glass. The glass was a little bit tinted. And so we were quite alarmed with what we saw, but also very interested. But we did get out of there and head on home. So this was one of the earlier experiences I've had with UFOs, and I've always been concerned and interested in them for the rest of my life because of this incident. So.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for sharing those 2 important events in your life, and would just like to say thanks for your courage in coming forward and talking to us and to the people through the internet, which we'll post this on the internet, so other people will be able to hear about your experiences. And because it's important that people start to share these very important experiences that they've had with other people, so that we'll all know that the UFO phenomenon is real and it deserves our attention. So thank you very much for doing this, Russell.
Appreciate the chance to speak with you on it. Thank you.
Last time Russell said something about his training and stuff that...
Yeah, could you just mention to us that what do you do for a living? And
Well, I went to college and got a bachelor's degree in geology, and I couldn't find work at that time, so I went an extra year and ended up with the dual teaching certificate. So I taught earth science, chemistry, and physics for 8 years. Since then, I've been an independent contractor geologist, back to the School of Mines and do fire assaying now on the side and consulting, so and everything. So
okay, well, thank you so much, Russell.
appreciate it.
All right.